Okay, everyone. So I think there's a few people maybe still coming in, but we'll hopefully just get started. We appreciate everyone is very, very busy and probably had a very long day at work. So thank you very much for coming along and joining us tonight. So this is the first CPD session BorrowMyDoggy have done before. So hopefully this is something we can do quite regularly and hopefully we can sort of support the veterinary teams and everyone out there. So what we're going to be chatting tonight about is separation issues and dogs and how to manage them. So we're also recording tonight's session and the next couple of days I'll send you over a link to access that recording just to let you know on that. So just to start off, I just want to introduce myself. I know some of you, I don't know everyone. So hello, I'm Jill McMaster. I'm the Business Development Manager and Vet at BorrowMyDoggy. So if you ever have any questions about BorrowMyDoggy or anything you want to ask us, or you're needing resources or anything, or you've got clients you think we could help, always just give me a shout. That's absolutely fine. I'm just going to be Jill at BorrowMyDoggy.com. So first of all, I just want to explain a little bit more about BorrowMyDoggy. So some of you know us, some of you don't. I just want to give a little brief overview of what it is that we do. So what we are is we're an online platform that's bringing together two different groups of people. So we have our owners and our borrowers. There's no money changing hands between owners and borrowers, but we're creating these trusted mutual beneficial relationships to help everybody out. So for owners, it could be they're going on holidays or they're working, or we have a number of people on the platform that have health issues, you know, and are needing that little bit of help or just had a baby, things like that. We've also got plenty of dogs with things like obesity that could do with extra exercise. And we've seen a big rise in dogs with separation anxiety. And so people have been looking for that bit of support. You know, they're working with a behaviourist, they're doing all the right things, but having someone there to help them in the community with their dog care can be really, really helpful in those situations. Hence why we had a chat with Rosie about this subject matter for tonight. So obviously the other side of BorrowMyDoggy is our borrowers. So usually there are people that don't have their own dogs, but we do have quite a large amount of people now that are using it to actually help socialize their dogs. So they meet other dogs, they sometimes help with dog care, but it's a really nice way, especially with all these pandemic puppies, you know, for them to actually get to know other dogs, and it's something we've seen a real rise in. Other than that, it's mostly people that don't have their own dogs. Plenty of reasons people can't have their own dogs at the time. It's a huge commitment to have a dog. I know I'm talking to the wrong people. Everyone here knows the huge commitment it is to have a dog. Instead, what they can do is have that kind of experience of a dog before taking on that commitment, and potentially, you know, they might make the wrong decision by getting a dog. They might not be ready. It's better that they find out when they borrow a dog, see how much work it really is, see what kind of breed they should be working with before they kind of make that commitment. So the dog obviously benefits, they're getting extra exercise, they're getting extra company. And we also find that, you know, the borrowers are getting that kind of physical, mental well-being benefit, which really, really helps people out with that happy dog time. So the other thing as well to mention always our website's a very important factor to say. If anyone wants to message or meet anyone on BorrowMyDoggy, they have to go through our verification checks, they have to go through our insurance, and we also have a 24/7 vet line in place as well. As well as a doggy info sheet that will give information about your practice, if that's where the dog goes, for all that kind of info. It's always nice to know that, you know, if they are wanting to check something and they're not sure, they can speak to a vet or vet nurse 24/7, you know, so they're not going to be just going online and finding out some interesting information. So as I said, it's our first CPD session tonight, so we're very, very lucky to have Rosie along to talk with us tonight. So our plan for this evening is Rosie's going to take us through her presentation, and after that we'll have some time hopefully for a bit of a Q&A, okay? So if you do have any questions at the end, you can pop them in the little Q&A box and we'll go through as many as we can. So big welcome to Rosie. I'll give you a wee bit of background, Rosie. Some of you might have worked with her before, but in case you haven't, we can give a bit more information. So Rosie Bescabey is a fully qualified clinical animal behaviourist with a degree in zoology and psychology from the University of Bristol and a postgraduate diploma in companion animal behaviour counselling from Southampton University. She is an ASAB certified clinical animal behaviourist, a full member of the Association of Pet Behaviour Counsellors, and a member of the Association of Pet Dog Trainers, and registered as both a clinical animal behaviourist and as an animal training instructor with the Animal Behaviour and Training Council. So I think we all agree she's got lots of experience to be talking about what she's talking about tonight. So I will pass you over to Rosie.
Well, thanks, Jill, and thank you all for being here this evening, and for BorrowMyDoggy for inviting me to speak. I'm hoping, there we go, it does flick through. That's a good start. Jill's already gone through that, so I'm not going to bore you again. Let's just crack on. So we just want to start with how life has changed for our dogs post-COVID. And I'm also going to add into here as well the current kind of cost of living crisis. It is also going to influence our dog owners to some extent too. So we know from the Pet Food Manufacturers Association's latest study that there's now 3 million more dogs in the UK than there were pre-COVID. We all know that there was this massive puppy boom, and there's just been a huge increase in the number of puppies and dogs that owners have got in the last couple of years. We know that lockdown meant that dogs and new puppies that were purchased during a lockdown had not been left alone much, or not at all, for a fairly long period of time, and that's obviously going to influence have an impact on how they cope when they're left alone after a long period of company. A lot of owners were furloughed, and like I said, now we've got the cost of living crisis, so a lot of owners have got financial concerns, and that's going to have a massive impact on where people turn to for behavioural advice when they are having problems with their animals. We also know that the biggest cohort of people who got dogs during COVID were the younger generation, so the 18 to 30-year-olds, and they are also been shown to be the ones who generally seek their advice online, so through apps or through Google or through social media, as opposed to face-to-face with maybe with the vet team, or finding a local trainer through Yellow Pages as we used to in the old days. And we also know that, unfortunately, advice is freely given by any Tom, Dick or Harry, whether it's veterinary advice or behavioural advice, on social media. So there's a lot of inappropriate advice being given on these platforms, and unfortunately is being sought by that kind of generation that turn to technology for the advice. So dogs are a social species. They are what we call an obligate social species. So to them, company is as important for their survival as food and drink and water and shelter, for example. They form attachments pretty much in the same way that humans do. So humans are a social species as well. And because of that, it's normal for them to want to retain contact with their social group. We know that they also reunite bonds after a period of separation. So it's normal for them to greet their social group when there's been a period apart. Dogs obviously rely on us as a vital resource provider. We control most things in their lives, including when they can go to the toilet, when they get fed, where they have access to resting places, when they get their walks, etc. So we're really important to them as part of their lives, not just because they're an obligate social species, but also because of how much we control as their owners. We know through some studies that up to 55% of the general dog population show some signs of SRB, which stands for separation-related behaviours. And what's really interesting about that figure is that figure is what owners report. So what owners are observing as an obvious sign of separation-related behaviour. And we also know that, and we'll come on to this in a minute, that one of the signs of separation distress is dogs that just shut down and become inhibited. So they won't eat when they're left alone, they won't drink when they're left alone, they might just curl up and sleep. So from the owner's perspective, it may not seem, they might not come even in that group of 55% that are showing signs, because from the owner's perspective, it might be that their dog appears fine when left alone, but actually isn't very happy at all. We also know that only around 8% of owners who admit that their dog shows signs of separation distress only 8% seek professional help from a behaviourist. So as I said, the rest of that cohort are either not seeking advice at all, or perhaps they're turning to social media or to other less qualified sources. So what happened to the term separation anxiety? So we all probably still use this term, owners certainly do. Historically, it's the term that we've always used whenever a dog is showing any sort of undesirable behaviour when they're left at home alone, or potentially for some dogs when they are separated from a specific attachment figure. However, there's a bit of a problem using this term because it's not a diagnosis. Separation anxiety, as we call it, or separation-related behaviours, are simply a description of certain behaviours in a given context. And there are loads of different potential differentials as to why a dog might be exhibiting undesirable behaviour when left at home alone. So these all need to be ruled out by a behaviourist. You're not going to have time in the consult to do this part of it. I'm just going through this bit for your information as to what we would do once we get a referral. Your job will be to explore potential medical problems that are contributing to the behaviour, or take them into consideration, and we'll come on to that in a bit more detail in a minute. And then the behaviourist job will be to consider things like, has this puppy or this older dog ever learnt that being left at home alone is fine? Or have they always learnt that being left home alone is scary? So from day one puppyhood, have they always experienced distress when left alone? That will, in that cohort, will also come the COVID lockdown puppies who never learnt to be alone, full stop. Never mind that they learnt it was okay to be left alone. We have some dogs who have become sensitized to isolation. So by that, it might have been a gradual process whereby the owner might have shut their puppy in a crate, which they didn't like very much, and they showed a bit of distress, or they closed doors on them and the puppy showed a little bit of distress. And gradually over time, the dog has become sensitized to some sort of isolation or confinement. Again, we're going to come on to all of these in a bit more detail in a minute. Confinement distress would be very specific to having a barrier around them where they're unable to access freedom or unable to access something else that they might want to get to, such as a comfortable sofa or a comfortable bed, or just access to the window to look out of, or something that's just confining them, as opposed to it being an inherent problem about being left on their own at home. We have, this is quite a small cohort, but we do get dogs who experience distress when they're separated from a specific attachment figure. So those are dogs who, it doesn't matter who else you leave them with for company, if their owner or owners or certain personal people are not there, they cannot cope. There are some dogs who experienced a very scary event when they were left at home alone, such as a burglary or an attempted break-in, and that then triggers them being scared or fearful of being left home alone. We've got dogs who are scared of actually something else. For example, very noise-sensitive dogs who have not got an independent coping strategy when noises happen. So it might, let's use fireworks as a typical noise sensitivity. So you might have a dog who fireworks go off, and when the owners are home, the dog becomes very clingy and sits on the owner's lap and wraps their legs around the owner's neck, and the owner reinforces that behaviour heavily. Which isn't necessarily the wrong thing to do, by the way, but that's a whole nother webinar altogether about noise sensitivity and fireworks. But what the dog is learning is that the only way they have learned to cope with firework noises is to get reassurance from the owner, and they can only cope when the owner is present. So it might be that when the dog is left home alone and a car door slams, or the fire alarm starts beeping, or something that reminds them of firework noises, because the owner's not there as their coping strategy, they start to get distressed. So it might not actually be a separation problem per se, but more of an issue with something else like noises going on. We have dogs who express a lot of frustration, and that might be related to the expectation of them normally getting to leave with the owner. So normally getting to go to work with the owner, or going on walks with the owner, or going out in the owner's car, so that when the owner does shut the front door on them and leave them behind, they actually just experience this frustration as opposed to anxiety or fear. Or the frustration might be related to activity going on outside the house. So it might be that the dog is quite settled until the postman comes, or until people start walking past the window. And that activity, that kind of territorial behaviour, sets the dog off. And again, when the owner's home, it might be that the owner tells the dog to stop and can suppress that behaviour. But when the owner is not home, they're unable to suppress the behaviour. We also have dogs who are just bored. They might not be physically or mentally stimulated enough. They might be playing with the sofa cushions and ragging them around and creating a whole feather storm when the owner's out. They might be opportunistically scavenging in the bin, as per the photo I showed just now of the 2 Labradors with the bin contents empty. So again, that isn't necessarily a dog that's distressed. It might just be bored out of its brain or having a bit of fun. And there again, I've got lack of inhibition in general when the owner isn't present. So owners that use punishment or suppression when they're with their dog, so trying to stop their dog barking, or stop their dog stealing, or stop their dog scavenging in the bin when they're home, simply means that the dog is going to fill their boots as soon as the owner is not home. Just quickly, the link between pain and behaviour in general, and specifically to separation. So we know that there's a huge overlap between medical issues and behavioural issues, whether that's musculoskeletal, gastrointestinal, dermatological, canine cognitive dysfunction, sensory deprivation, etc. The list goes on. There is no black and white ever in terms of a medical problem and a behavioural problem. Daniel Mills and colleagues at Lincoln University found that between 28 and 82% of the behaviour referral caseload there had underlying pain. And we know also that there's a big link between noise sensitivity and pain, because if you've got a dog that finds noise just generally quite difficult, that's going to create bodily tension, and that bodily tension is going to exacerbate any chronic pain they have. And likewise, if you've got a dog that jumps easily in response to loud noises, that's going to trigger a pain response, and then you've got a situation where noise predicts pain, and the whole thing becomes a big mishmash of unpleasant emotions. We also know there's loads of studies that show this link between noise sensitivity and separation distress. And like I've already said, that might be due to those dogs who are scared of being left alone in case there are noises and their owner's not there to help them as their coping strategy. It might be that they don't like being left alone in case any noises might happen. We're not quite sure why there's such a massive overlap, whether it's just a genetic link or a temperament type, but there is a massive link between dogs with noise sensitivity and separation distress. We also know that pain and illness in general is going to sensitize us, all of us. So any of us who've got a bit of a headache or tummy upset, we're less able to cope in general. We're more irritable, we're more reactive. And the majority of us, when we're feeling a bit rotten, will generally seek proximity to an attachment figure. And that's no different for our dogs either. So ear infections, anything, it might seem mild to us, but that will definitely make our dogs clingier to their owners. A clinical exam might be limited in some dogs. They might be too anxious. They might have bodily tension that's masking any mild pain. They might be fearful of the vets or of unfamiliar people examining them and giving a good poke and a prod. So if that's the case, the conclusion of the Mills study, by the way, was that it is better for vets to treat suspected pain first rather than consider its significance only when the animal does not respond to behaviour therapy. So instead of thinking, I'm pretty sure this is only behavioural, I'm going to refer them to a behaviourist, do make sure you either fully rule out or do a pain relief trial first, alongside referring that animal. Will thank you for it, and the animal will, and the owner will. So what are some of the symptoms of any sort of separation related behaviour? So one study a couple of years ago showed that the majority of dogs vocalized. The second most common symptom is depression. So like I've already said, these dogs who just won't eat, won't drink, won't bark at the door, just curl up in their beds. And my biggest concern with that cohort is the welfare concern of them, probably not many of them. I think I've had one case that I can remember where the owner recognised the dog wasn't happy. So even though it wasn't a problem for them, they hadn't had complaints from neighbours about the barking, the house wasn't getting destroyed, they weren't having toileting to clear up when they got home, they sought professional help recognising that their dog wasn't happy. But given that it's the second most popular symptom from this study, that's certainly not what the referral caseload I see is. The third was destructiveness, and the fourth was inappropriate, undesirable elimination of some sort. We also see dogs that pace, they're unable to settle, excessive salivating, panting, not eating, vigilant, so watching the door the whole time or going between the front door and the windows. Attempts to prevent the person leaving, that's often using aggressive strategies. Vomiting in more extreme cases, self-mutilation and repetitive behaviours. A little bit of myth busting. So owners will often report, we came home and I knew the dog knew he'd done wrong because they look really guilty. And we all see these videos on YouTube and going around social media of spot the dog who did the destruction. Dogs don't actually show guilt. What they do is they respond to even the mildest signs of confrontational human body language with what we call appeasement behavior. So in dogs, because they're a social species, they are very, very, very good at trying to appease and diffuse a situation. So trying to look, as we would call, cute, but basically trying to communicate with the threat. That's effectively what they're feeling, that they are not a threat. Please be nice to me. I mean you no harm. Please stop being horrible to me. Even if, as said, even if the body language is very mild. And they can also start to predict. So what they can't predict is, I destroyed the sofa and I shouldn't have done that. What they can predict is, the destruction in the lounge leads to my owner coming home and getting angry. So they can't compute their behavior that caused the destruction in the lounge, caused the human to be angry. It's just that destruction of the lounge equals angry person. So they can start to predict when an owner is going to get cross with them, but they can't attribute their behavior that caused that. I hope that makes sense. Dogs also have no morals. They have no ability to have morals or concept of right or wrong like we do. They simply do what works and what makes them feel better, and they stop doing things that make them that don't work or that make them feel bad. Dogs don't do things to cause spite. They're opportunistic, or they're using behaviours to help themselves in a situation they are struggling with. There's no evidence in the research that shows that getting a second dog helps a dog with separation issues. However, I have known dogs that definitely have been helped by the presence of a second dog. I have also seen plenty of dogs who the second dog ends up exhibiting the same behaviours through observational learning, and then the owner's got two dogs with separation issues. So it's certainly not something I'd advise well, I'd ever advise. I'd always recommend trying to get on top of the first dog separation issues. Turning the radio on before you leave, that won't provide appropriate company. What it might do is actually cause the dog to feel anxious whenever you turn the radio on, because it now starts to predict, the radio predicts isolation. However, if the radio is generally on when the owner is home and the dog is relaxed, then keeping the radio on is no bad thing. It will help drown out external noises that may trigger a dog, and you're leaving something on that's associated with relaxation and comfort. But certainly turning it on before you leave is probably doing the opposite. Kongs on their own won't resolve the problem. What happens when the Kong is empty or you've got a dog that's too anxious to eat? Neutering won't resolve a male dog's separation issues. If anything, it might make it worse, because if the behaviour is motivated through fear or anxiety and you remove the only bit of confidence they have got that their testosterone is giving them, then you're likely to exacerbate any fear or anxiety issues. And making sure that you, owners ignore the dog before they leave and when they first get home. Now, dogs, as I said, are a social species, and it's normal for them to reunite after a period of separation. It's not normal social behaviour on greeting to ignore each other. I use an example of if I came home from work and my husband was home and he said to me, "Oh, hi, how are you? Have you had a good day?" And I just completely ignored him for 10 minutes until I felt ready to say hello to him. How's that going to make him feel? And it's the same with my dogs. They get up to greet me at the front door calmly, and I greet them calmly. If I've got a dog that's hugely over the top because they've been upset about the fact they've been left alone, then sure, what I'm not going to do is massively hype them up and go, "Oh my God, I've missed you so much," and create this whole bigger situation. But I'm certainly not going to ignore them altogether. It's going to be actually really quite damaging if you've got a dog that's of an anxious attachment type to be ignored as well on returning home. Puppies, and a little bit on prevention. So in young puppies, reaction to separation from their litter mates and their mother in the form of vocalizing and scrabbling is evolutionary adaptive. So it's normal behavior. So separation is something that has to be taught. Puppies will become distressed if they find themselves alone. Puppies naturally follow for that same reason. And the aim as puppy owners is to develop a secure attachment type. And we do that by building independence and separation slowly. And that's the same for both at the nighttime and in the daytime. And what we don't want to ever do is advise owners to leave their puppies to cry it out, put the earplugs in, go to the top floor in the loft, leave the puppy downstairs, and whatever you do, do not go to them. Because we wouldn't do that with any baby, and we certainly shouldn't be advising puppy owners to do it either. What that's going to do is create what we call learned helplessness. So it's just teaching the puppy that nobody is there to help, nobody is there to come to them when they're feeling distressed. They're in this strange new environment. They've been taken away from everything familiar to them, and they should start off in the same way that we teach humans to start off with their babies. So with their new owner next to them, either the puppy in a bed next to the owner's bed, or the owner sleeps downstairs for a while. And during the day, we gradually build up segregation so that the puppy does not show distress. And hopefully over a period of a few days or a week, or maybe a couple of weeks for some sensitive puppies, the nighttime they can build up that distance, or end up with the puppy where they want them to be. There's also no harm in them having the puppy in the bedroom full time if that's what they want to do. That does not cause separation issues. Puppies need to start learning that being separated is not frightening from around 3 weeks of age. So that's when they're with their breeders. And again, we all know about the importance of choosing a good breeder that are handling their puppies individually, because that's the very first sign from a puppy of being taken away from their litter mates and their mum. And that needs to be a pleasant experience, and for very short periods of time initially. And spending time, just away from the rest of the litter, rest of the mum, exploring novel objects by themselves without a human interacting with them either. Super important. We want to make the transition into the new home as least stressful as possible. So make sure that the puppy has company for as long as they need, which might be a week or two, I would say. So the owner's not taking a weekend off work and then planning to go back to work on the Monday. Even a week off work is cutting it very fine. Make sure that they are transferred with the scent of the mother or the litter mates with blankets or toys. Make sure they're super comfortable, they're super warm, they have hot water bottles. And we're going to, as I said, gradually decrease the reliance on the owners over time. We want to create a really strong positive association with a special area. That might be a crate or a pen or a room, initially near the owner. And for short periods of separation, we're going to start off when the puppy is asleep, and puppies should sleep a lot. So when the puppy is asleep, that's when the owner might go and take the bins out, or might go upstairs and do some putting the laundry away. I don't know, whatever. Just short periods where they can keep their ear open for the puppy, but the puppy just gets subconsciously used to silence or the sound of doors closing. We can also use baby gates to just create barriers between the owners and the puppy, again making sure that that's a positive experience. The puppy should not be scrabbling at the gate or vocalizing. They should be given a Kong or a tasty chew, and the owner initially might need to sit right up next to that gate with the puppy just the other side of it. Again, I'm not going to keep repeating it, but I am going to keep repeating it. The important principle is for it to be gradually built up. And once the puppy can remain relaxed with the owner moving around the home and popping out of sight and in and out of the garden, then we can start to trial absences for longer periods out of the house. So the aim with segregation is to avoid distress. However, I would also say that particularly for tired puppies, some whinging is inevitable. So what I don't want to encourage owners to do is respond to a puppy's every single whim, because then you're also not teaching a puppy how to cope with any sort of frustration. So like toddlers, I'm not tired, I don't want to go to sleep, but actually they are tired and they do need to go to sleep. So it's trying to educate owners to be able to identify the difference between a bit of a whinge, that kind of, oh, I don't want to be in my crate, versus it becoming distressed or a puppy in distress. So we never want to ignore distress. When it comes to whinging, I would always suggest the owner just kind of is around and make sure we set up the crate and the environment so that there's as little whinging as possible. So they go in there and they have a Kong or a chew or a licky mat or something to settle themselves down. And they're doing that at a time that the puppy is naturally going to have a little nap, and it should lead into nap time. The treat wizard, I would always use part of meal portions, particularly when puppies are on 3 or even 4 meals a day for the very tiny puppies, that the owner uses some of their meal portions to sprinkle in these safe areas when the puppy's not there. So the puppy naturally comes across these treats that the treat wizard has left, and they start to think, cool, blimey, this is a really cool place to be, because every time I wander in here, there's magical treats been left, or part of their meals been left on the floor or on a licky mat. We don't want to reject our puppies or our dogs when they are seeking interaction, because otherwise if they're seeking some form of reassurance or some form of interaction from us, and we say, go away, you're really annoying me and I really don't want you to be this clingy, that's going to make them feel even worse. But equally, we want to be careful we don't actively encourage really dependent behavior. So a puppy that literally only sleeps on the owner's lap, you want to make sure that they might fall asleep on the owner's lap, but the owner is then transferring them into their safe place, and that gradually we want to try and encourage that puppy to fall asleep by themselves in that safe place and not rely on sitting on the owner in order to fall asleep. We're going to use lots of video. We'll come on to that in a second. The crate debate. So some advantages of using a crate, full stop, not necessarily for separation, but just having a crate. Some of the advantages to that are that they can be a really useful training tool. They teach impulse control. So they teach the dog to wait. How I would use them anyway is teaching the dog to wait in the crate, like this picture here. The dog is choosing to stay in that crate with the door open. So you're teaching them to control themselves even when they want access out of the crate. You can teach choice games. So do you want to go in the crate or not? It's up to you. Great stuff happens when you go in the crate, or great stuff is already in the crate, but you don't have to go in there and get it if you don't want to. It's entirely up to you. So we're not forcing the dog in. If it's taught properly, it can be a safe space. However, I would also say that a safe space is only safe by nature if the dog has access in and out of it 24/7. So when I recommend crates, the majority of the time, at least 90% of the time, the crate should be left open and it should be a choice-based thing. We might need to just close doors to start with whilst the puppy learns to just self-settle with its chews and its Kongs, and then I would open the door up once the puppy's dozy and about to fall asleep. Yes, certainly I would be looking at getting rid of shutting the door after a few months of age if we're doing it with puppies. Initially, they can be a cue for relaxation. So the puppies, it's a bit like an off switch. Going in your crate is when you go to sleep. And that can be really useful, but it can be a double-edged sword there as well, because it's not necessarily that convenient to have a puppy or a dog that only falls asleep or settles when you've got the crate present. The other advantage of it does prepare our dogs for inevitable confinement that's going to happen at some point in their lives, whether it's in a car, at the vets when they come in to kennels, it can be super useful that you've got a dog that's quite happy behind bars. However, the disadvantages of crates are that they are frequently misused by the length of time expected for dogs to spend in them. Owners will not give their dogs water in there because it sloshes all over the bedding, or because it makes them wee in their crate. They don't give any bedding or an inappropriate amount of bedding. It's not particularly comfortable in there, maybe because the dog shreds the bedding in there. So I would again say some of this is a welfare issue, and the space provided for the dog is inadequate a lot of the time. The other disadvantage of crates is they're often used to mask the symptoms from the owner's perspective. I have been to cases where clients have double crated, so put a crate inside a crate with padlocks on because the dog was that distressed about being left on their own at home, and then subsequently being shut in a crate that they would break through the crate on its own. So it resulted in 2 crates and a padlock, as opposed to trying to resolve the distress the dog was in. Obviously, by the time I got there, they were prepared to seek some sort of help. Shutting your dog in a crate prevents exploratory behaviours and removes all choice, and it can create barrier frustration. So again, I've been to many cases. In fact, I'm not going to say that because it's a case study I've got for you at the end of the talk. Hold on that one. So what advice can we give our owners in terms of management advice when they come into the consult room? So the first thing is to advise them to obtain some video footage of what the dog actually does when they're left alone, because often what we're building it on is what we find when we come home, or reports from the neighbours about the vocalising. And it's super useful to video them and find out what might trigger the vocalising. Is it when the postman comes to the door, or is it as soon as you've left the house? What exactly are they destroying? Is it just the bin? Or is it the front door mat and the sofa cushions? If an owner comes to you and says, oh, my dog's terribly, it's chewing everything, but they don't actually mention that the chewing only happens when the dog is left alone, there are certain questions you might be able to ask in that first consult to actually decipher, is this a separation issue? Is it an opportunistic bin raiding issue, in which case just get a lock on your bin, put the bin elsewhere? Or is this a potential referral case? So the aim with your advice in the first aid consult is to just prevent the problem from getting any worse. You might need to recommend management equipment such as baby gates if you've got a dog that's showing aggression, trying to stop the owners leaving, blocking visual access at windows if you've got a dog that's just sitting at the window barking at everyone walking past, for example. And the main bit of advice you need to give is to tell them to just, for now, avoid situations where the animal displays the unwanted behavior. And with separation problems, it does take a village, because that basically means the dog cannot be left alone past the point of it coping until they've got a behavior plan in place, and we'll gradually build that time up that the dog can cope with. So that might involve daycare, although I'm not a massive fan of daycare. They're often far too arousing for dogs. They're run by not appropriately qualified people, not trained in behavior. The interactions between the dogs are often not as great as owners think they are. Dogs don't get enough rest or sleep, lots of things I don't like about it. They might make use of neighbours or family or friends. They might sometimes need to alter their working regime, so working from home or taking the dog to work with them. Of course, BorrowMyDoggy is a major, a huge advantage here for people with dogs with separation issues that are friendly with other people or other dogs. We also need to make sure that owners are not punishing their dogs, and that's both when they return home and they find that there has been undesirable behavior when they've been left, but also they're not using any sort of bark activated collars or any sort of spray collars or noise, anything that's basically designed to stop the dog from expressing the behavior that they're trying to express as a communication method, that something they are struggling with something, or that they're trying to communicate, they're either bored out of their brains or they're distressed by something. So anything that's designed to suppress that is a welfare issue. And we've already said that a dog does not compute their behavior, their actions with any punishment when the owner comes home. So all that's going to do is make the dog start to become anxious about the owner's arrival home. We need to make sure the dogs are getting appropriate mental and physical stimulation prior to being left home alone. You also might want to ask, how long are these dogs being expected to be okay home alone. 8-hour days, not okay. We also need to make sure we're fully investigating potential medical issues, as we've already said. So when we're taking the history and trying to find out, what differentials we're ruling out there, we will ask things such as, what's the length of time your dog is left alone? What's the pattern of symptoms that we see on the video footage that we've taken? What's the dog's behaviour like when the owner is present? How much do they seek attention? How hyper attached are they? How controlling are they of other resources? If you've got a dog that's trying to prevent the owner from leaving the house, that might be a control of their resource issue, as opposed to a separation issue. They might be fine actually once the owner's gone, it's just attempted to control that resource. What's their general personality type? Are they generally quite an anxious disposition? Are they reactive to people and dogs out on walks? In which case, is it that they're barking at people and dogs out of the window when they're left alone? If there's toileting problems, where are the locations of that toileting? What's the consistency? Because distress and adrenaline will obviously make the consistency of feces loose. What's the quantity? Is it excessive? Do we need to be exploring potential tummy upsets? What's the location of destructive behaviour? Is it at the exit points where the owner's walked out the front door? Is it where the dog's looking out at dogs playing in the park and feeling really frustrated that he can't go out and join them? Is there behavioural inhibition going on? Is the dog eating, drinking, moving from resting place to resting place in the home when left alone? What's the pre-departure behaviour? Is the dog following the owner and starting to get distressed when the owner's getting ready to leave? And is the greeting behaviour really, really over the top? Is it relief that they're experiencing when the owner comes home? What's the dog's early experience of separation as a puppy? Were they left to cry it out as a puppy, in which case they are more likely to be an insecure attachment type and not cope so well later on in life with separation? What's the dog's response when they are in the company of other people or other dogs? So can we use BorrowMyDoggy and neighbours and friends and family, or is it a hyper attachment issue? Is there history of punishment when the owner's present, in which case is the dog just living its best life when the owner's not present? And are they getting appropriate stimulation? So as I said, cameras are vital both throughout the diagnosis and through the treatment process, because during the treatment sessions, the way we would build up the dog being able to cope when left alone is gradually, in case you hadn't figured that out already. So the dog must remain relaxed in order to learn that isolation is okay. So we only build the length of time up if the dog is remaining relaxed. If the dog shows distress, they're only learning that separation is negative. So you're just reinforcing the behavior that separation is negative. So this is not a recipe where the owners leave the house for 30 seconds, then 1 minute, then 2 minutes, then 3 minutes, because all of that is futile if the whole time the dog is showing distress. It's just a complete waste of everyone's time. It's also never done in a linear fashion. So we never do 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, because the dog will simply learn that it's getting harder and harder and harder each session, and they'll become anxious between each session that the owner's going to be gone longer this time. So we always make sure it's variable, with obviously over time it is a gradual increase in the length of time, but we throw in lots of nice easy sessions along the way. I'm speeding. I'm very aware I'm talking fast because I don't want to overrun too much. So one of the bits of advice we can give our owners is the importance of building independence and relaxation when the owner is home. So that, again, there is no point in us getting to the point of the owner leaving the house if the dog is unable to self-settle and stay relaxed when the owner moves from room to room of the house. So we can reduce overall arousal levels by using sniffing activities, so getting them to search for their food by scatter feeding in the garden or on the carpet or even on the hard kitchen floor. We can get them to provide loads of chewing opportunities. I tend to recommend 2 different types of chews. One is the consumable types of chews, but they should still take dogs 5-10 minutes. No point in a 30-second chew, and it's not even a chew, that's a treat, but yeah, something that does last them a little bit and they have to work at. And I also recommend chews that are available 24/7 for dogs to help themselves to, and to have a really good gnaw on. There will be a balance there between potential dental issues and appropriate items for dogs to chew. But I always say to people, if your dog is chewing the table leg, that's not going to do its teeth too much good either. So there is a balance there, a trade-off, and I will use it on a case-by-case basis depending on what the dog might be doing when they're home alone, and how much they need something to chew on. Some dogs are far more oral than others. Opportunities for licking, so stuffed cons filled with wet food or licky mats. Some of my favorites are natural yogurt or baby food, fruit or veg blended baby food, quite healthy, quite low calorie, but super tasty. Licking and chewing and oral behaviors are going to release a lot of endorphins in the dog's brain that's going to help them feel much more relaxed and reduce arousal. And we need to make sure that our dogs have plenty of rest and sleep throughout the day. They have multiple choices of comfortable resting places, not just one stingy bit of vet bed on the floor. It's not, if I wouldn't want to curl up on it, I wouldn't expect my dog to want to curl up in it. All of these behaviors as well are self-reinforcing activities that don't involve the owner. So they're really good at building independence, because the owner might be able to do a food scatter in the garden and then go off and make their own breakfast. And it might be the only time of the day that that dog isn't stuck to their heels. So it's a really good way of actually teaching them that there are enjoyable activities that exist that do not involve the owner. And we've already said about not encouraging dependence, but equally not rejecting. So the treatment will depend on the diagnosis, and we always deal with the underlying motivation. We want to work on increasing the ability to self-settle when the owner is present and or after a period of arousal. So if you've got a dog that barks at the postman, we need to teach that dog to be able to self-settle without the owner going, "Oh, shut up, that's enough," or even the owner helping them by saying "in your bed," even if they're doing it in a nice way. The dog is still not learning to do that themselves. So that's one exercise we would do. We might introduce barriers so the dog or the puppy can cope with barriers. So we might introduce barriers carefully. If barriers are required, and I think we've got this in our head that we have to crate train, we have to get puppy pens, we have to get baby gates. And actually, a lot of the time that is the problem, as we'll see from a case study in a minute. Then we want to gradually build in departures. We want to establish what the starting point is that the dog can cope with. So some dogs, it might be 30 seconds or less. Other dogs, it might be after half an hour, they start getting bored, or even longer. So we start at that point and we gradually build the length of departures, but not in a linear manner. And the dog should never be left past the point of them coping at any time during the treatment period. Otherwise, they're taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. So again, desensitization basically means starting at a level that the dog barely notices and increase the difficulty so slowly that the dog doesn't realize the difficulty is increasing. If the dog chooses to lie by the exit point, that is where I would encourage relaxation initially. So I would put a comfy resting place there, and I would leave the dog, encourage the dog to settle there, as opposed to trying to move them away from that area and encourage them to settle and relax somewhere away from that door. The first step is getting them to relax, then we can gradually move the bed area away from the door. Right, so 2 case studies and then we're done. I think we're all right. So case study of Archie, he's a Springer Spaniel. He was rehomed too young away from his mum at 6 weeks of age. So I already know that's going to have implications in terms of attachment. The owner is generally home, so very rarely is he left at home alone. He's generally a very anxious disposition, and he also has a very fearful temperament, so he's scared of all sorts of noises, everyday noises, so traffic, sirens, helicopters, things that he is unable to, he's exposed to them every single day. And this has a massive impact mainly on his walks. So he's very, very anxious on his walks. He has no ability to settle when the owner is home. He has no independent, comfortable area to settle. He would always just get on the sofa next to the owner. That's the only, he didn't have his own bed. The owner loved the fact that he always just chose to sit next to her and followed her from room to room. So that was heavily encouraged. And he was showing a lot of destruction when the owner left the house. And I'm going to show you a video of this destruction now. It's quite severe. And my diagnosis from watching the video footage was that this destruction was both an attempt to reunite with the owner, because you'll see from the video that the location was right at the front door where the owner had left from, but also for the endorphin effect. So I've already said that oral behavior creates endorphins, and sometimes even shredding and ripping with the mouth does the same job. I think there might be a little bit of a delay here between the sound and the picture, but it really doesn't matter in this case. I'm going to move on because you get the idea. It's basically minutes. So you can see he'd already trashed the carpet at the front door, which is why they put that barrier across, but he'd just moved the destruction. His body language to me there is showing that he's quite enjoying that exercise. So it's not that his body language is severely panicking or distressed or desperately trying to escape out of the house, which is why I'm pretty sure there's that endorphin effect there as well. So what did we do? We addressed the underlying anxiety and fearful behaviour, and the first step we did was I actually liaised with the vet about psychoactive medication, because when we're working with a dog who you cannot prevent exposure to the triggers, so particularly for him the noises, we weren't able to walk him, and without walking a young Springer Spaniel, the boredom and the lack of mental and physical stimulation wasn't going to get ticked off either. So that massively helped him on walks, which then helped us being able to provide appropriate physical and mental stimulation without inducing anxiety or the fear response. Initially, we drove him to secure fields before the medication had kicked in, but there was quite a quick progress with him on walks once that had kicked in. And it also obviously helped him cope with separation as well. We taught the dog to settle in the owner's presence, and we provided lots of comfortable beds, and he very quickly, actually, as soon as he had options, he'd rather have his own space than be up next to the owner. So a lot of this was to do with the owner's behaviour and their relationship with the dog, as well as the other way around. So we did lots of we're not rejecting him at all, but equally, if he chooses to come and sit next to you, that's fine. You're not going to tell him to get off or get in his own bed, but equally, you're going to try and really restrain yourself to not hug him and touch him constantly when he's sitting next to you. And we provided appropriate items for him to chew and shred, both when the owner was present and initially when he was left alone, although quite quickly he didn't need that. He just learned to settle and sleep when the owner was left. So that was a success. I'm only obviously going to tell you about the success one. Another case study was Ozzy. So Ozzy's a little crossbreed. He had a young couple, were his owners, and he was crated when they left him, because when they were home, he stole quite a lot of things. He stole shoes and books and basically anything that was left out within reach, he would steal. He would never destroy the items, so he would just steal them. He was shut in a crate for 8 hours a day. A family member would pop in halfway through and let him out in the garden for a wee. He would then be resistant to go back in his crate, and he would never, ever choose to go in his crate of his own accord when the owners were present. So it was always, they always had to get him in or bribe him in with some food and shut him in. He was never choosing, which is information to me, it was not his safe place. He's never choosing to go in there. When the owner was home and the dog would steal, Ozzy would steal things, they would pursue him and go to him and take the item off him. So he was constantly getting attention and reinforcement for the stealing behaviour. And the fact that he wasn't stealing to enjoy destroying or chewing, again suggests to me that the stealing behavior, the reinforcement must have been coming from the owners because it wasn't coming from the item itself. And the owners emailed me with the video footage with this quote. They said, "This is incredibly upsetting for us to see him so distressed." So I'm going to show you the video that they sent me. It's not a great video. He's in this crate here. You will need your volume up because it's not that loud. That's it. So if it wasn't for the radio playing in the background there, I think I probably would have thought the sound wasn't working. So that for these owners, they found very distressing to watch. So this was clear to me, again, from the start, that this was more of an owner issue and an owner expectation issue of what they wanted their dog to be like when left home alone. And I agree with them. He's certainly not relaxed, but I think I know the reason why he's not relaxed. And I don't think he's got a separation issue at all. I think he's just sick of being in that crate. And again, I understand the owner's reluctance to leave him out of the crate when he was stealing things. So that was the prime area that we needed to work on. And again, it wasn't really an area we had to work on in terms of dog training. It was owner training in terms of how they responded when the dog stole an item, to make sure that there was no reinforcement pattern going on there at all. I also had welfare concerns about the overuse of the crate, the length of time he was expected to be in there, particularly in an area he didn't want to be, he was never choosing to be. That dog's response to going in the crate is information to us. He was just showing barrier frustration, so he just didn't want to be confined. We made use of BorrowMyDoggy for that one, so that he had a lot more company throughout the day. That also helped with the owner's reluctance to leave him for 8 hours a day in the house in case the stealing behavior did become destructive. So again, just another one to really reinforce my point that a crate does not resolve separation issues. If anything, it can make them worse. Some useful resources for you. As said, this is going to, I think you'll get the recording so you can refer back to this for your owners, and if you're interested in any of the resources I've talked about. And that's it. Thank you very much for coming and listening. Please keep in touch, follow me on my socials. I'm always trying to put tips and hints on there, and drop me an email if you've got any questions that we haven't got time to answer tonight. That's absolutely fine.
Well, thank you very much, Rosie. That was fantastic. I got a lot from that myself, so I've been sitting writing my notes. So I hope everyone has enjoyed that. I appreciate if people have to run away, but we've got time for 1 or 2 questions, Rosie. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine by me. Yeah.
Fab. So if you want to pop into the little Q&A session, little section, if you have any questions, I'm sure Rosie would be happy to answer. If you're looking kind of to refer, obviously you can go to our website, but if there's any general questions, go for it. You must have been very thorough.
Sorry, I do feel like I've taken.
Oh no, we've got one there. We've got a few of those. So Jenny's asking, how do you feel about devices where the owners can speak to their pets remotely?
Oh yeah, really, really good question actually, because they're becoming more popular. I don't feel anything really. I would always use the dog as my information for that, so I would judge how that particular dog is. It's not something I'd ever recommend, because they're a lot of money. I'd never recommend. It's not going to fix the problem. rarely going to fix the problem. I think sometimes it can cause more confusion. But if an owner's got one, I would just be saying, well, how does your dog respond to that? I'd want to see the video footage myself, as well as how they respond to it, to see whether it's helping or causing the dog to become wound up. But I think every dog's going to respond differently. And most dogs, my dogs, wouldn't respond at all. Have you ever tried FaceTiming your dog? They don't generally show a lot of interest.
Perfect, thank you. So Three Bears Vets are asking, what do you recommend for chewable items?
I purposefully left that out because it's a bit of a contentious subject. I'm more than happy for you to email and ask me, but I am aware I'm not a vet. I would always judge it on the individual dog, as I've said, and I would always use it as like a way, you know, lesser of two evils a lot of the time, depending on what the dog might be chewing of the home that they shouldn't. Can I stop there?
That's perfectly right. Perfectly right. I've just got a couple more, so we'll just take another couple. So how do you stop owners using crates for punishment when it's meant to be their safe space?
Same way you have to educate owners in everything we do and don't want them to do. Education, kindly talking about the fact that the crate should be a safe place. I'd be asking what sort of behaviours they're punishing by putting them in the crate, and trying to get them to understand those behaviours rather than, and how we would deal with those behaviours, rather than focusing on punishment full stop. But yeah, just saying that if the dog associates their safe place with punishment, it's not going to be a safe place. But yeah, difficult one. Human psychology for all of us is the worst / most interesting part of this.
I think we'll take one more. I think this is really apt for the moment. So for dogs who've been hand reared, for example, foreign rescues, etc., how would you suggest helping with separation issues if they haven't had a breeder or a mum?
Yeah, really good. Yeah, really increased, haven't they, in numbers, the foreign rescues? And I don't think a lot of them have been hand reared, but a great question, because that's all really, and hand rearing is very, very difficult to do well, to do properly, so that the puppy learns a realistic expectation that they can't always get what they want when they want it, and that they learn a secure attachment type with the person that's feeding them, and they don't become insecure attached, and that's what creates the separation issues. So really, it's often about the advice that the hand rearer is given, but also just in the same way that I would teach any puppy, which is just making sure that they're kept under threshold whenever separation is rehearsed, and if they're not able to stay under threshold, we need to make it easier for them, and just gradually build it up so that the puppy can stay settled. With puppies, really, they should be the easiest because they should be sleeping a lot, and if they're not sleeping a lot, I'd be addressing why they're not sleeping a lot, because those are the times that I would be building up a bit of independence and just subconsciously getting them used to being left on their own.
Perfect. But one last one that's hopefully just a quickie, so we can just add this one on. So if a dog were to carry around its lead when at another house without the owner, oh, sorry, all just moved up at one time there. Give me 1 second. If a dog were to carry around its lead when at another house without the owner and going to the door, looking out the window for the owner, would you take the lead away or leave it as a comforter?
I'd leave it as a comforter, or see if I can provide something else that the dog might, yeah, great question. I'd have no reason to take it off them if it's not being chewed through or anything. If that's the dog's choice, then yeah, leave them to it.
Perfect. Well, that's fantastic. Apologies for the couple of questions we didn't quite get to there, but thank you so much for all your time tonight, everyone, coming along. As I say, I'll send the recording on in the next few days. You'll get a link and you can have a little look at it if there's anything else. And as Rosie says, you can always check in on all her socials as well. And you can always give her a shout if you've got a referral going. And if any questions about BorrowMyDoggy, you can always give me a shout as well. So thank you, Rosie. Thank you, everyone. And we hope you all have a nice relaxed evening. Okay,
Thank you very much.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.